I watched Star Wars Episode 3 in theaters, and I feel it is incumbent upon me to say something controversial yet brave. Not one damn thing in the Star Wars franchise tops the Clone Wars animated series. And a big part of that is because Anakin's characterization is stronger in the Clone Wars than it is in the prequels. The dissonance in Anakin's characterization between Clone Wars and the prequels is, in large part, because George Lucas was prioritizing plot over things like character and dialogue. And I think that impulse puts George Lucas in a long legacy, starting with the oldest surviving work of literary theory. So let's talk about Anakin Skywalker and Greek tragedy. If there's one thing to know about George Lucas, it's that the guy loves a blueprint. Like, he famously referred to The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell for the structure of the original trilogy. In the book, Campbell proposed that hero myths across time and cultures follow a very similar structure. George Lucas basically said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. He recreated that structure in outer space, and boom, he had a hit film franchise on his hands. I don't know if George Lucas has spoken about Aristotle, but please let me know if he has. In any case, Aristotle's Poetics is the oldest surviving work of Greek dramatic theory, having been written around 335 BC. Despite its age, it continues to provide material for high school English teachers and screenwriters everywhere. I really have no doubt that Poetics would have influenced George Lucas, directly or indirectly. And I feel so confident about that because in the Star Wars prequels, George Lucas crafted what Aristotle would consider a successful tragedy. So these are Aristotle's standards for a tragic hero and how they apply to Anakin Skywalker. In a tragic hero's downfall, they have to have somewhere to fall down from. So they begin the narrative with a high social status. Obviously, Anakin Skywalker's formative years were spent in slavery, so his noble birth is his status as the chosen one. The tragic hero's downfall must derive from some kind of flaw in their character. The most common tragic flaw is hubris, excessive pride. And certainly Anakin is prideful. But in Anakin's case, I think the more pertinent flaw is his deep-seated fear, which is brought up explicitly in the films multiple times.
I sense much fear in you.
His fear is what drives him to do literally anything for the chance of keeping Padme alive, even killing f***ing kids and allying himself with a weirdo. Fate can play a role in the narrative, but the tragic hero's downfall must be as a result of their own choices. After all, Anakin does ultimately fulfill the prophecy that was ascribed to him, but he probably could have reached that point earlier and with a lower body count if his pride, fear, and need for control didn't drive him to join the Sith. Bad things happen to the hero as a result of his choices, and often those bad things cause more suffering than the hero deserves. In Anakin's case, this comes in the form of his disfigurement by his mentor Obi-Wan, and the death of Padme, which is particularly cruel and ironic given that he made the choices he made to keep her alive. As to whether or not his suffering is excessive,
he did kill a bunch of fucking kids.
but obviously it's a lot. Like, Darth Vader is going through it. The tragic hero has the discovery that their reversal of fortune was brought about by their own actions. For Anakin, this certainly doesn't happen in the prequels, and I honestly don't know if it happens at all. He says at one point to Luke in episode 6 that it's too late for him to join the light side, which seems regretful, and then he obviously chooses to kill Palpatine, and in a grand gesture, makes things right with the light side of the Force. But is this recognition of his own culpability? I'm unsure. Catharsis is like microdosing pity and fear and sorrow. When a tragedy is successful, it causes an emotional purge in the audience. A lot of the terms used in poetics are debated, catharsis being no exception, but I think what Aristotle was getting at is a subjective, audience-based phenomenon. To me, Anakin's downfall is more cathartic in the Clone Wars, even though we see less of Darth Vader. But others would disagree, including maybe Aristotle. So obviously, according to Aristotle, George Lucas did a pretty good job at writing a tragedy. Even the things that Lucas gets the most flack for, Aristotle doesn't care as much about in the context of tragedy. Aristotle said that a tragedy shouldn't be a good person becoming a bad person, but a morally gray, highborn person making choices that leads them to misfortune. I'm reading Aristotle off the iPad. There remains then the character between these two extremes, that of a man who is not eminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, but by some error or frailty. He must be one who is highly renowned and prosperous. Anakin is born the chosen one. He has massive potential and squanders it by making bad choices. That's a tragedy. Similarly, Aristotle values plot in tragedy over character and dialogue. As long as a story is doing this, it's a tragedy. Off the iPad again. The plot, then, is the first principle, and as it were, the soul of a tragedy. Character holds the second place. In poetics, Aristotle explicitly says that skillfully written dialogue, in-depth characterization, and the depiction of a good hero who is corrupted are not important to the success of a tragedy. And to his credit, George Lucas mostly nails what Aristotle was getting at here. Here's where I'm going to get editorial and have enough hubris to disagree with Aristotle and George Lucas's approach to depicting Anakin Skywalker on screen. Because I do think taking the time to depict Anakin as a well-rounded individual with deep relationships who is capable of immense goodness and deep darkness makes his fate all the more tragic. And I know this because Clone Wars did it. George Lucas knew enough that even if tragedy is supposed to deal with people of noble birth, that wouldn't resonate with modern audiences. Certainly not modern American audiences. Having Anakin's nobility be this innate quality of being the chosen one is almost like affirming the American dream. Anakin is able to supersede his class with merit and talent. So it's interesting that George's interpretation of noble birth was pliable, but he didn't budge on Aristotle's belief that tragedy is rooted in plot. And that results in these prequel films that are trying to tell us why Anakin became Vader, but aren't character-driven enough to give us a sense of it. It's also worth noting that Anakin is consistently pretty unlikable in these films, which is a strange choice given that these films were written with the understanding that the audience knows what happens to Anakin at the end. We're already biased against him and looking for red flags. So it's weird that as a viewer, you have to speculate what his good qualities are. By comparison, in Clone Wars, there are multiple instances in which Anakin defies the authority of his Jedi superiors in order to do something morally good, like save lives. And this storytelling decision communicates three things to us. One is that it reinforces the theme that Jedi dogma is not serving their stated goals. Two is Anakin's tragic flaw, that he's prideful enough to shrug off the wisdom of his elders to do what he wants to do. But third is that his intentions are good. We don't have to rely on Padme or Luke to tell us that there's good in him.
There's good in him. I know there is good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully.
Because we can see it. Clone Wars deftly demonstrates time and time again that Anakin is made vulnerable by his pride and his fear. But through his actions, we can see that he's capable of immense goodness and joy and love, which makes his fate a source of underlying dread as you watch the show. In Clone Wars, when Anakin does allow his pride and his fear to control his decision-making and consign him to the Sith, it's not surprising, but it's deeply heartbreaking. Because in Clone Wars, Anakin is not only losing the potential to be the chosen one, it's the loss of his potential to be a real source of change in the Jedi Order, the potential to be a brother to Obi-Wan, a mentor to Ahsoka, a lover to Padme. And while I logically knew those things while watching the prequels, I didn't feel them because I didn't care about his character. In the prequels, Anakin was an avatar for pain and anger and fear. He wasn't a person.
I'm a person and my name is Anakin.
For me, that made the films pedantic, a morality play, not a tragedy I felt in my bones. I've seen the argument that Anakin should be as unlikable as he is in the prequels because we're seeing him at his worst. He was born into slavery and taken away from his mother and saw active combat at a formative age. How can I expect him to behave any differently? And my answer to that is that I don't hold Anakin to the standards of a human being because he's a fictional character. He was created in service of a story. So it isn't inevitable that he's like that. George Lucas wrote him that way. I also wanted to address a comment I saw about the dialogue in the prequels, because people make the criticism that they don't talk how people talk. They aren't talking the way people talk to each other. And I saw someone say that's because the language is Shakespearean. Don't piss me off. The dialogue in these movies is not Shakespearean on the basis that both of them are unintelligible to you. You're suggesting that this royal throne of kings, this sceptered isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden, demi-paradise, is functioning in an analogous way to, I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here, everything is soft and smooth. Be so fucking serious.